Hey guys. Tonight, we descend into the flickering torchlight of a forgotten chapel. You're not here to pray at least. Not yet. The scent of candle wax and dust clings to your sleeves as your footsteps echo on uneven stone. Just ahead. Past cracked marble and slumped pews, something glints a blade. Impossibly clean. Resting atop a velvet-draped altar. It's said to be holy. It's also said to be cursed. Honestly, same difference around here. You draw closer, the chapel's chill deepens, but your palms are warm, sweaty. Maybe. The sword doesn't look like much from afar, just a long, narrow weapon. Its hilt wrapped in faded red leather. A cross-shaped guard that gleams like someone recently polished it, which is strange, because no one's used this chapel in centuries. But of course you touch it. And of course it feels alive. Not in a fantasy. It vibrates with power way more like. This object has seen things, and you're about to see them too. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your city and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're all tuning in from across time zones and sword lore. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The blade is older than the room. That much is obvious. The inscription, barely visible beneath oxidation, runs down the fuller Latin. Of course, and overly dramatic gladius dei in tenebris lucet. God's sword shines in the dark. Subtle. Huh? You lift it carefully, expecting dust or resistance, but it slides up like it's been waiting just for you. A little too easy. The altar doesn't creak. The chapel doesn't collapse. Yet, and that's when it hits you. This isn't some generic longsword. This is the sword. Or at least one of many pretenders that have claimed that title. Medieval Romans weren't above a bit of relic inflation. Some claimed Constantine's original laborum ended up reforged into a holy blade by papal blacksmiths. Others said it was the very weapon carried by Saint Maurice, whose relics were paraded through towns during Holy Roman campaigns as morale boosts and, occasionally, Ziga tactics. Wave a saint's blade around, and suddenly your enemy gets spiritual indigestion. The metal is real. That much is clear. But the lore historians still argue whether this so-called holy sword was ever used in real battle or just a church prop equal parts propaganda and placebo. One theory even suggests that most blessed blades were reforged fragments of Roman Sparta swords melted and recast during medieval crusades, blessed after the fact with a splash of wine and a bishop's mildly bored prayer. Still, it cuts. And let's be honest, half the allure is believing that if you hold it tightly enough, you might suddenly become more than just a guy in a ruined chapel. You might be a chosen one. Spoiler, you're not. But the enemy doesn't need to know that. Back in the day, knights who bore these swords often carried scrolls attesting to their sanctity signed by bishops, sealed with wax, sometimes even kissed by the Pope. There's one case where a French crusader allegedly refused food for 3 days because someone else touched his sword without permission. That's devotion. Or delusion? Or both? You run a thumb across the blade's edge. It's still sharp. That shouldn't be possible. Weapons left unused, this long typically decay. Rust? Or simply become dull museum pieces. But this one, it feels battle-ready. Could be due to the strange oil seeping from the hilt. Could be something else. Some claim these holy weapons were preserved not by skill, but by saintly intervention. Others suggest beeswax and fish oil. Again, devotion versus space. Delusion? Quirky tidbit for you. One documented holy sword, kept in a monastery in southern Italy, was regularly anointed with myrrh and goat's milk. Why? Because a vision told the monks it would please the blade's spirit. The blade's spirit. That's a lot of pressure for a sword. But let's bring it closer to home. As you cradle the weapon, you can't shake the thought that it's staring back. Not literally. This isn't fantasy. But you start remembering strange details. The chapel door didn't squeak. The torches don't flicker unless you move. And the sword. Its reflection shows something slightly different. You tilt it. And for half a second, there's no you. Just the chapel. Empty. Still. But hey, maybe you're just tired. It's probably the lack of oxygen in here. Still. When you finally sheath it, oh yes. There's a scabbard. Embroidered and suspiciously well-maintained, you feel? Heavier. Not emotionally. Physically, the sword's weight seems to shift depending on your grip. Now it's light. Now, it drags your arm like guilt after a lie. Holy. Sure. But holiness rarely comes without a price tag. So you walk out of the chapel careful. Slow steps. Because this is the kind of place where echo feels permanent and wonder what next. Do you carry it to war? Do you return it to the church? Do you bury it under a moonlit oak tree to avoid the curse? Or do you keep walking? Pretending you never touched it. You'll make that call later. For now, just hold it. Let the silence settle in your chest. After all, the sword's holy and you're only human. You don't make it far before you hear the sound metal striking metal in rhythmic clinks. At first, it echoes like distant bells or some blacksmith's fever dream. But then you crest a hill and see it a forge tucked behind the remnants of a crumbling Roman outpost. Still smoldering with heat, like it never stopped working. And maybe it didn't. There's something timeless about a forge. Even now, in this shadowy place where ivy claws at ancient stone and the roof's more moss than tile, the air is thick with heat and the scent of coal and sweat. You step closer. Your holy sword wrapped tightly in cloth. You don't want to tempt fate or the smith. He's there. Of course. Hood down. Muscles caked with soot. Beard that probably predates the Gregorian calendar. He glances at your blade. Then at you, and doesn't say a word. Just gestures for you to come forward. You obey. Because it's either that, or flee. And frankly, your legs are still tired from last night's "you found a cursed relic in a chapel" excursion. The forge hums. Orange light dances on walls, still bearing faded Latin graffiti. One phrase reads, Domine, conserva-nos a nobis ipsis. Lord, save us from ourselves. Fitting. The smith sets down his hammer, wipes his brow, and finally speaks in a gravel-coated whisper. You want to know how it was made? It doesn't mean yours. He means all of them. The sword, the spear, the bolts. They don't begin on battlefields. They begin here. In the heat and hiss, shaped by men who never ride to war, but shape the war all the same. You kneel near the anvil as he begins to tell you through calloused hands and quiet gestures how holy weapons were born. It starts with iron. Always iron. But not just any ore. In medieval Rome, and especially in the zones that called themselves its successor, Byzantium, the Papal States, the German-Roman patchwork of emperors and electors' swordsmiths looked for blood ore. Dark red hematite mined from old Roman sites, sometimes mixed with relic ash. The idea was that iron touched by empire would make a blade fit for another, but forging a holy weapon wasn't just metallurgy, it was liturgy. The blacksmith might fast for days, or work barefoot, or sing psalms while folding steel. Some forges burned incense in with the coal. One manual from 1274 describes cooling the blade in water steeped in elderflower and bits of the true cross, which, historien still argue, likely meant any bit of wood they could find in a church basement. The cross-shaped guard wasn't just decoration. It turned the sword into a relic in itself. In some ceremonies, newly forged swords were laid across altars and anointed like newborns. Blessing a blade didn't just protect the user, it was meant to turn each stroke into a divine act. Strike sin. One monk wrote in a marginal note beside a forging manual, "But don't chip the altar." Of course, not every sword received the full holy spa treatment. Some were just convenient lies. A knight might buy a holy sword title by donating to a monastery. One particularly cynical tale tells of a bishop who blessed over 24 holy blades in one afternoon for a crusade recruitment drive. He reportedly charged by the inch. Divine capitalism at its finest, but the craftsmanship, that was real. The folding, the balance. The tiny groove down the blade's center, called the fuller, not a blood groove. By the way, that's a myth. Sorry. The fuller lightens the sword and improves flexibility. And the pommel, that hefty knob at the end, not just for balance. More than one desperate fighter used it to knock an opponent's teeth into next Thursday. The smith lifts a sword blank from the coals. Red as Mars and humming with heat, he hammers. Sparks jump like fireflies. You watch the rhythm the way he turns the blade. Checks the edge. Listens to the metal song. It's hypnotic. Almost meditative. You wonder if this is what monks felt when copying texts, faith in the repetition. Then he sets the blank aside and shows you something older. A broken hilt, carved with a saint's name, Sebastianus. The blade gone. Just a jagged stump remains. Fell. The smith mutters. On a hill, no one remembers. You don't ask if he forged it. Maybe he did. Maybe it was his masterpiece. Or his mistake. Here's the strange part. Some say these holy weapons choose their moments. That they dull in peacetime and sing in war. One Crusader diary describes a blade that refused to cut unless scripture was read aloud beside it. Another tale speaks of a knight whose sword grew heavier the closer he came to breaking his vows. Heavy with guilt? Maybe. Or just waterlogged. Either way, the symbolism stuck. Quirky fact time in one obscure 13th century ceremony. A blacksmith was canonically married to his forge before crafting a church-sanctioned weapon. It involved vows, a ring welded from scrap, and a kiss to the anvil. Monks attended. Someone played the lute. Love is complicated. You sit beside the dying coals as the smith begins to rewrap your sword. He doesn't bless it. He doesn't polish it. He just nods. It's yours now. He says, keep it sheathed more often than not. Holy things don't like being used. You leave as the sun begins to rise, if that's what it is. Around here, even dawn feels suspicious. The sword on your back feels lighter. Or heavier. You're not sure anymore. All you know is something changed. You crossed from myth into metal, and there's no going back. You don't sleep that night. Not really. You close your eyes, but the weight of the sword beside you hums against the ground like a heartbeat. When you finally drift, your dreams are full of marching boots, whispering relics, and a faceless figure in chainmail offering you the sword again and again, each time with bloodier hands. Dawn arrives. Or at least the light does. And with it, your next destination, a monastery carved into the side of a cliff. Part sanctuary. Part fortress. You hike the switchback trail, carved by pilgrims and penitents, wondering what kind of man would build a church this close to the sky. By the time you reach the top, your legs burn and your thoughts are molten. The monks meet you silently, robed and hooded, their eyes flickering toward the blade slung across your back. They do not speak. They do not bless. One simply gestures toward a low archway and walks ahead. You follow, ducking under stone beams that still bear sword, marks old scars from an age when monks weren't just scribes, but soldiers. They lead you to a small courtyard. In the center stands a statue weathered and moss-covered, but still majestic. A knight in prayer, kneeling with both hands, gripping the pommel of a sword planted in the ground. A plaque reads, Beatus Armandus. Militum confessor. Blessed Armand. Confessor of soldiers. You're here to see what remains of his blade. The monk waves his hand, and a stone panel shifts. Beneath it, a glass case containing a sword unlike yours. Shorter. Thicker. With strange notches along the spine, and a grip wrapped in layers of blackened cloth. They call this the martyr, knight's sword. You kneel to see it closer, and for a moment, you swear the room tilts. The story goes like this. Armand was a knight during the late 11th century. A man who took no glory from war, but followed every campaign with a confessor's heart. He was said to weep after every battle. Not from grief, but from shame. They say he refused a blade for years, fighting with a wooden staff or nothing at all, until a vision came to him. A flaming sword descending in a beam of light. When he woke, the sword lay beside him, cool to the touch, but etched with fire. Historians still argue whether Armand ever existed. Some suggest he's an amalgamation of several Crusader monks. Others believe he was invented by the Order of Saint Valerian as a recruitment myth. But the sword exists. You're looking at it. This sword wasn't forged to slay. It was forged to redeem. That's the phrase carved into the blade, per sanguinem. Pax. Through blood. Peace. Problematic. But putic. The notches, according to one record, each marked a time the sword was drawn without necessity. The last notch is half-formed. You trace the glass. Your own sword. The one you pulled from the chapel feels heavier on your back again, like it's listening. Like it disapproves. Here's a strange bit. In a monastery ledger from 1183. There's a single line in red ink. The sword weeps oil. Do not wipe it. No context. Just that. Weeps. Not drips. Not leaks. Weeps. Did they believe it mourned? Did they want it to? The monk beside you finally speaks. He never killed with it. His voice is soft. Distant. But it still bled. You nod. That makes no sense. And yet somehow, it does. Holy weapons were not just tools. They were mirrors. You rise. As you turn to leave, another monk offers you a scroll aged, tied with a crimson thread. You open it later, and find it contains nothing but one line. Over and over again. Draw only when drawn by justice. Quirky note. One 14th century knight reportedly carried 2 swords, one for battle, one for show, and labeled them Wrath and Mercy. He was later excommunicated for using the wrong one during a duel in a tavern. Anyway, you descend the cliff monastery slowly, your sword untouched. Something's changed. Again, you wonder how many times a blade can remake you before you forget what you were before. The wind whistles against the mountainside. And for a moment, you imagine the martyr. Knight's blade still echoing through the pass. A silent scream of restraint. Then, as your boots touch flat earth again, the weight shifts. The sword hums against your spine. And you know you'll be drawing it soon. You don't have time to debate morality much longer. Because the road narrows into the crunch of gravel and the rustle of distant drums. You're not alone anymore. A column of men marches ahead, chainmail glinting in bursts of sun between the trees. No banners. No heralds. Just rows upon rows of faces locked forward. Hands curled tight around the shafts of long spears. You step into rhythm with them, unnoticed, like you've always belonged. The long spear, sometimes called a pike, sometimes a Huster redux. Depending on who's writing the history, isn't the weapon that gets songs written about it? No glowing prophecies. No dragon slaying. No fancy relic boxes. But when it moves as one with hundreds of others, it becomes something else entirely. You're not holding a stick. You're holding a wall. It stretches twice your height. Maybe more? Too long to use alone. Too awkward for duels. But, in a line of men trained to pivot, brace, and thrust in perfect sync, it becomes unbeatable. There's no flash. No. Flourish. It's the weapon of patience, of endurance, of control, which makes it terrifying. The commander barks an order. You lockstep, spears raise, then lower, and suddenly you're part of a living creature, bristling, rhythmic, silent, except for the shuff of boots and the occasional clatter of a strap being tightened. The guy beside you, a boy barely 20, gives a half smile. First time, you nod. He nods back. Hold tight. It's like dancing, only louder and bloodier. Historically, long spears became the backbone of late medieval infantry formations, especially as mounted knights became too expensive to field in large numbers. Spearmen were the great equalizer poor, disciplined, and utterly essential. In the later Roman-influenced states, they even mimicked older phalanx tactics, drawing direct inspiration from the old legion's testudo and triple-line formations. You're not just copying Romans, you're resurrecting them. The commander halts. You brace, then, without warning, It begins. The enemy doesn't charge, they run. Not cavalry, not even knights, just men in mismatched armor. Desperate and loud. Hoping fear might do what weapons can't. They crash against the front line and vanish into it. You don't even stab. You brace. The spear absorbs everything. Your shoulder trembles. The force hits like thunder, then passes through the line like wind. One man breaks the formation. He screams, slashes at a helmeted head. Another spear rises from the second rank. Thunk and silence returns. This is the logic of the long spear. It doesn't make heroes. It makes formations. And formations win wars. You're not swinging wildly. You're waiting for openings. Every move is controlled. Even your breath. Inhale when they come. Exhale when they fall. That's how pike warfare worked. Especially in the Holy Roman context. It was geometry and grit. Rectangles of men moving like one creature. It could be glorious or just mud and sweat and crushed toes. Historians still argue whether such formations were as effective as contemporary chroniclers claim, or if they just looked impressive from castle windows. Either way, they felt unstoppable from where you're standing. The fight is over before you realize it. A few bodies on the ground. A few wounded groaning. Your hands are shaking. Not from fear, from stillness. The adrenaline has nowhere to go. The boy next to you sighs. No glory? Huh. You shake your head. He laughs. That's why it works. Here's your odd fact of the day. Some spear formations used whistles to time their strikes. High-pitched notes carried better across chaos than shouting did. One Swiss account mentions a captain who conducted his pikemen like an orchestra. He later died when he tried to duel a French knight with a baton. The commander walks the line, stops in front of you, looks at your sheathed sword. You didn't draw. He says, you nod. Didn't need to. He grunts approval and moves on. Funny, isn't it? The blade burning a hole in your back. And it's a stick that kept you alive. The march resumes. The boy hums an old tune. Something about wine and walls. You don't know the words, but you walk in time. Spear tip, bouncing in rhythm with your steps. Wondering how many others passed through this same forest. Spears, in hand, and didn't return. You do, this time, but the sword itches again. The rhythm of the march fades by midday. You've left the forest behind, and with it, the pikes. The boy with the humming voice, and the brief comfort of anonymity. The ground flattens into cracked dirt and heat. You follow a dried riverbed until the terrain dips and widens into a clearing flat. Perfect and eerily familiar. You've never been here, but your body recognizes it. Formation ground, training ground, death ground. You step forward, and the ghosts step with you. They don't look like you. They wear armor that glints gold and steel. Crests of lions and eagles. Cloaks dyed in the deep reds of empire. This is a Roman formation. Reborn in medieval bones, and you're walking straight into their test, the line drill. No pikes this time, just order and pressure. The instructor is waiting. Bald, bronze-skinned, and covered in dust. He's already yelling before you can speak. You there, pick a slot. Spearman's gone. Your replacement. You nod and take your place. The man to your left nods once, then starts forward. The one to your right, missing a finger. Probably not relevant. Probably. Then it begins. The drill. Line up, lockstep. Press forward. Shield up. Brace. You obey. Again and again. The long spear's gone. Replaced by something shorter and faster. A Roman hasta? Maybe. Reimagined with a medieval shaft and a brutal iron tip. You stab. Retract. Shuffle forward. And repeat. The instructor walks behind the line. Kicking shins. Adjusting grips? No armor. No brakes. Just the sound of coordinated breath and scraped leather sandals over dust. It's more than muscle memory. It's mental conditioning. These formations weren't built for flair. They were built for the long haul. To survive hours under siege, arrow fire, or the crushing weight of cavalry. And you start to understand something important. This wasn't the arena of legends. This was the arena of attrition. Interestingly, historians still debate whether these medieval Roman formations ever truly matched their ancient predecessors. Some say the techniques were ceremonial, reenactments for imperial pageantry. Others claim they were deadly effective in a world where chaos needed choreography. Either way, you feel it in your knees. Now, ancient logic, buried in bruises. One quirky fact from the record books: a 12th century treatise on formation combat recommended soldiers chew parsley before battle to calm their nerves and avoid bad breath in tight ranks. The same scroll also warned against onions. They sow division, make of that what you will. The sun climbs high. The instructor's voice becomes hoarse. Your arm aches. You lose track of time. Then, without fanfare, the line is dismissed. You stagger toward the shade. Your fingers are blistered. Your tunic soaked through. The man with the missing finger sits beside you and offers a flask. You kept time, he says. That's all that matters. You raise your hand to accept the water and notice something. Your holy sword, still sheathed, has shifted again. It hangs lower, heavier. You unsling it slowly. The leather wrap is damp, but the blade's presence feels distant, like it's listening less, maybe even sulking. You think back to something you heard in the monastery, that holy swords don't enjoy competition, especially not from formations. They want duels. They want songs. And here you are, dancing in line with 100 others, making no name for yourself. Just another spear, another shield. Maybe the sword's not jealous. Maybe it's just patient. You look across the field. Another line is forming. Samdril. New soldiers. One trips. One throws up. One yells too early. And the instructor throws his helmet in frustration, screaming. This isn't a tavern brawl. This is order. If you don't want to be order, go be Bones. He might be overworked. Still, you get it. Formation isn't glorious. It isn't cinematic. But it's the heartbeat of armies that last more than one campaign. And in the echo of that cadence, you hear the pulse of empires trying not to collapse. As evening descends, you find a quiet corner to sit, leaning against a cart full of spearheads. You unwrap the sword one last time and stare at it. You'll get your moment. You whisper, not sure if you're promising or warning. The blade doesn't respond. but it gleams just once before the light fades. You wake to the sound of fog moving. Not wind, not rain. Just fog thick. Quiet. Living fog. Brushing across your cloak, like silk, soaked in sleep. The training field is gone. The spear carts. The drill lines. The shouting instructor. They vanished behind a curtain of white, so dense you can't see more than a few feet ahead. You should panic. Instead, you rise slowly, adjusting your sword at your back, and step into the silence. Somewhere within this shifting blur, a horn blows. Not loud, not modern, not a call to war, but to gather. The kind of sound made by people who aren't calling you, but something older. You walk toward it. Of course you do. The air is wet against your skin. You can't see your hands without holding them close. And then, like ink soaking into fabric, shadows begin to form humanoid outlines, moving in the fog. Slow and sure. You pose. They do not. You realize with a chill that they're training. Formations. Just like yesterday. But there's no instructor. No shouting. No boots on gravel. Only breath. Dozens of figures practicing in silence. Spears rising. Lowering. Stepping. Turning. As if they've been doing it forever. And maybe they have. You edge closer. No one looks at you. No one acknowledges you. But the movement adjusts slightly to your presence. Like a dance that just folded in a new partner. You fall in beside one of them. Mirror the motion. It's easier than expected. Natural. Almost inevitable. This is the ghost drill. Not literal ghosts, probably, but remnants of something that trained itself so deeply into the ground. It never left. Old Roman drill camps were said to leave permanent resonance in the land. Especially if consecrated. In medieval times, soldiers sometimes marched through old ruins, specifically to absorb discipline from the stones. Historians still argue whether these practices were psychological preparation or genuine superstition. But tonight, it feels real. The spear you're handed isn't metal. It's wood. Carved and burnished. Its tip, charred black, like it's been dipped in lightning. You brace. Thrust. Twist. Step. Repeat. Around you, the fog moves with every formation, like breath. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. It's a rhythm older than music, a dance of intent. And then, something changes. The line halts. A space opens. One figure steps forward a little taller, robed instead of armored, holding something heavier than a spear. A long polearm. Maybe a sarissa, but shortened and tipped with steel that catches no light. He or she gestures to you. The challenge is clear. Demonstrate. You step forward. Spear in hand. You bow not out of courtesy, but instinct. Then the duel begins. It's not fast, not flashy. Every strike is measured. Like chess with consequences. You block once, twice. Strike to the side. The figure parries and counters. You're sweating already. Heart thudding. The fog closes in tighter. Then your foot slips. Only slightly. But enough. The polearm sweeps low. Catch your leg. And you fall. Not painfully. Not dramatically. Just flat against the cold ground. looking up at a figure who doesn't raise their weapon, doesn't gloat, doesn't even move. They offer you a hand. You take it, they nod once, and the drill resumes. But you're not part of it anymore. You've been dismissed. Or maybe accepted. It's hard to tell. You walk away from the fog, which slowly begins to thin behind you. The figures fade. The spear turns to smoke in your hands. And just as you step back into the normal world where grass has color and birds start to chirp, you hear the sound of clinking metal on your back. The sword? It's warm. Warmer than before. As if it noticed the duel, not pleased, not angry, just present. Here's your odd historical tidbit in one 13th century chronicle. A soldier reported that his sword hummed whenever he entered sacred ground. The church later called him a liar. His comrades called him lucky. The sword was confiscated. Of course. No one knows where it went. You settle beneath a tree, pulling your cloak tight. The fog lingers in the branches, reluctant to leave. You don't blame it. Part of you wants to go back, join the silent ranks, move without speaking, fight without ego, be absorbed into rhythm and purpose and ghostly precision. But your path is different. You have a sword, and swords are not meant to disappear quietly. The next village appears like a bad decision half swallowed by mud. Roofs sagging. Fences broken, like toothpicks. You weren't planning to stop here, but the ache in your legs and the rumbling in your stomach demand otherwise. Besides, the locals don't look like they have the strength to rob you. Even if they wanted to, you pass a group of children staring at you with the kind of wide, silent eyes usually reserved for storms and saints. One of them points at the sword on your back. Another mutters something in a dialect that might be Latin, filtered through mud and despair, the one with thunder in his bones. Not creepy at all. You find the smith by following the ringing sound sharp, slow, deliberate, not forging, tuning, which is strange. You don't usually tune weapons. Then you see it. A crossbow, but not the stubby kind carried by desperate men in alleys. This one is big, impossibly so. The stock is carved from polished ash wood, wrapped in iron bands etched with symbols that look like musical notes. The bow itself is steel, thick and glinting under morning haze. And the crank, it's mechanical art. Dozens of tiny gears, all in silent coordination. You can't help yourself. You walk toward it. The smith doesn't stop working. Doesn't greet you. Just says. Takes a full minute to crank. 30 seconds if you're in a hurry. 10 if you want it to snap. You nod slowly. And what does it do? He glances up. Saves a village. Ends a siege. Maybe takes a bishop off his horse if your aim's good. The humble crossbow called balistraria in official ledgers, devil's crank by the more poetic monks. It was the equalizer in medieval warfare. Easier to train than a longbow. More force per bolt than most swords could ever dream of. And it scared the pants off the nobility. Here's the funny part. The church hated it. Officially, in 1139, the Second Lateran Council declared the use of crossbows against fellow Christians a sin, a murderous and godless weapon. They called it. Historians still argue whether this was genuine spiritual horror or just fear that armored knights were becoming irrelevant. Either way, people kept using them. The smith shows you how the crank works. Slow. Relentless. Click. 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 The string draws back until it locks into place with a sound that feels final. He slides a bolt into place long bably. Thin. Triangular tipped. He doesn't fire. He just lets it sit there. It's a patient weapon. He mutters. You don't brandish it. You wait. You line up the world through a tiny slit, and then you make a decision. You ask him who he built it for. He shrugs. Anyone who can carry it and not die under the weight of their own breath? So, probably not you. Still, you reach for it just to feel the heft. And wow. Your arms say immediately, this isn't a weapon, it's a commitment. You imagine standing on a wall, cranking this thing with sweaty palms, hearing cavalry thunder toward you, praying, you get it loaded in time. It's not heroic. It's just pressure. And yet, it works. One well-aimed bolt could pierce armor. Stop a charge. Or silence a preacher mid-blessing. There are records of bolts punching clean through shields and ribs in the same motion. There's even a chronicler's note of a duke who was pinned to his horse like a robe to a hook. Charming. One quirky tidbit. Some medieval crossbowmen believed carving a saint's name into the bolt would improve aim. A few even left tiny scraps of parchment in the Quarrel Groove prayers folded into flight. You ask the smith if the markings on the steel bow mean anything. He grins. It's sheet music. You blink. 4. What he shrugs. No idea. I just copied it off a cathedral wall. Of course he did. You leave the village, not with the crossbow, but with something quieter respect. Respect for the men who cranked these beasts with shaking arms while smoke rose behind them. For the women who loaded bolts for their sons and husbands. For the builders who understood that silence before the shot is part of the weapon. As you walk, your sword remains silent. You think it's sulking again? Let it. This wasn't a blade story. This was a crank and a click and the waiting that came after. You're the only one awake when the ambush happens. Maybe it's the sword again. Its strange awareness humming through your spine like a whisper under the skin. Maybe it's the way the air shifted. Just slightly. A second before everything exploded into noise. Or maybe you just have excellent paranoia. Either way, you're already rolling off the road when the first bolt tears through the campfire's dying glow. It buries itself in a cooking pot. The clang echoes like a funeral bell. The second bolt finds flesh, not yours. Thankfully, a hired scout cries out and collapses with a sound like torn fabric. Shouts follow. The night rips open. You don't draw your sword. You reach for the crossbow. It's not the massive cathedral-tuned one you saw earlier. This is a soldier's version smaller. Uller, with a crank that grinds like someone cursing in metal. You don't remember when you picked it up. Probably looted it. Or maybe someone just shoved it into your hands while fleeing. The enemy charges. Shadows on horses. Shapes in mail. No banners. No heraldry. Just violence in motion. You drop behind an overturned cart. Wedge your boot into the frame. And begin cranking. Click. 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 The first one gets close. Too close. He's holding an axe and grinning. You aim without thinking. The bolt hums through the dark and lands just above his knee. He flips forward like a marionette whose strings got yanked wrong. You stare for a second, surprised, then reload. This is your first real crossbow kill. The kind that doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like gravity. Crossbows didn't just change warfare. They rewrote it. Before them, ranged kills were the work of experts longbowmen trained since childhood, or slingers with arms like siege engines. But the crossbow, it made deadly force available to anyone with patience and half a turn of the crank. Monks, farmers, you. That's why the nobility feared them. Not just because of armor-piercing force, but because they leveled the battlefield. Historians still argue whether the moral panic was genuine. Some scholars believe it was deeply tied to the theological hierarchy. The idea that a peasant killing a knight from 40 paces broke not only military decorum, but divin order. You weren't just killing a man. You were disrespecting the ladder. Another bolt loads. Another shape drops. This time you don't look too closely. Someone's yelling behind you. You ignore it. The sword is still at your back. Silent. Untouched. You could draw it. Charge? Make this personal, but the crossbow doesn't need honor. It just needs line of sight. You glance up, see a rider trying to circle wide. You turn, line up, fire. Miss? No humming satisfaction, just the sharp sting of failure. Quirky fact. Some medieval crossbowmen carried mirrors not for vanity, but to catch sun glare and blind charging enemies for a split second. One Flemish mercenary even claimed to angle his bolts using reflected light. Like a sniper, centuries early. Nobody believed him. But his nickname Saint Flash stuck anyway. You crawl toward the supply crates, hoping for more bolts. You find 3. One is bent. You try anyway. Eventually, the ambush fades. Either they gave up or melted into the hills like fog under sunrise. Bodies litter the road, yours and theirs. The survivors begin the grim count. You sit in silence, hands trembling, crossbow still loaded with your last bolt. The captain approaches, blood on his sleeve. You shoot, you nod. He grunts. Decent aim. Better reload speed. You think he's complimenting you? But his face doesn't move, just walks away. That's what crossbowmen were tools. Not knights. Not legends. Just battlefield punctuation marks. You finally unsling the sword. It's warm again. You draw it partway. Just enough to see your reflection. You expect disapproval. Judgment. Instead, it's quiet. Maybe the sword knows what the crossbow doesn't. That sometimes, surviving is the only honor that matters. You sheath it again. And keep walking. The chapel ruins are older than anyone in the nearby town can remember. They lie just beyond a wooded bend, partially swallowed by ivy and the kind of quiet that makes birds refuse to sing. You ask where the altar used to be. They point you toward a slab of moss-covered stone and mutter something you can't quite catch, though you're fairly certain it included the word forbidden. You're not here to pray. You're here because someone told you a cleric once fought here with a crossbow. And not just any crossbow. The papal repeater. No. You know that sounds fake? Too dramatic. Too Dan Brown. But that's what the villagers call it. A crossbow so well crafted, so frighteningly efficient, that even the church normally busy condemning things allegedly used it, quietly, discreetly, with a wink and a wince. You kneel beside the altar stone and brush away moss. Beneath the green fuzz, you find engravings, a faded cross, a stylized bolt, and the Latin phrase, Fiat voluntas tua perferum. Thy will be done through iron. You sit back and exhale slowly. So it's true. In the 13th and 14th centuries, the church was more than just incense and confessionals. It had lands, armies, enemies, and sometimes, when sermons failed, it turned to bolts. The idea of clerics wielding crossbows might sound absurd, like giving a grenade launcher to your accountant. But records exist. Letters from bishops authorizing quiet protection. Ledgers showing metal tools for night watch. Some friars even trained openly, especially those living near contested borders, where faith and force blurred into one long confession. Historians still argue whether these cleric crossbowmen were elite enforcers or just frightened monks with shaky aim. But one thing is certain: they existed. You find the foundation of what used to be a bell tower at its base. Tucked beneath rubble and thorns is a case, wooden, cracked, surprisingly intact. Inside the crossbow, it's smaller than the last one. Sleek, unadorned, except for a tiny bronze crucifix embedded in the stock. A hand crank folds neatly underneath, and the bow arms curve with the quiet confidence of something that knows what it is. You lift it. Light, cold, balanced. You shoulder it. It fits. The villagers warned you. Of course they did. They said this was the weapon that started a fire. Not literal, political. That one cleric used it during a night ambush, protecting a manuscript convoy from mercenaries. One shot, they say, through the chest of a noble's cousin. The fallout caused an entire bishopric to collapse. A dozen priests were exiled. The crossbow was buried in silence until now. You load it. Just once. Just to feel it. The bolt slides in with a whisper. The string clicks into place like a prayer spoken backward. You aim not at anything, just at the tree line. And suddenly, you understand why the church feared this thing so much. Because it works. Flawlessly. Quirky historical bit. In some regions, monks who used crossbows were required to perform penance afterward, usually a week of silence or fasting. One abbey even kept a book titled Confessions of the Triggered, listing every brother who ever pulled one. You fire the bolt. It splits a vine. You exhale. And just like that, something shifts. Your sword, still at your back, hums. Not loudly, not angrily, but curiously, as if to say, "So, we're doing this now." You retrieve the bolt, slip it back into the case. Then, for reasons you can't explain, you kneel at the altar slab. Not to pray, to remember. Weapons aren't evil. They just reflect what you bring to them. And today, you brought silence. He was dressed in polished plate and carried himself like a statue, come to life tall. Regal. Immovable. You saw him first at the edge of the ruined field, where wildflowers had reclaimed the outline of an old battlefield. The others gave him a wide berth. Not out of fear. Out of discomfort. This was Ser Aurelian of Maltes, Knight of the Third Flame, Defender of the True Word, or, as he was known in every tavern with decent wine and worse memory, the knight who refused bolts. You didn't believe it at first. Who would? Refusing to wear crossbow-resistant armor in an age of siege towers and assassins was like walking into a thunderstorm while loudly challenging the lightning. But Aurelian believed in a different kind of armor, one forged in ritual, honor, and the deep, absurd confidence of someone who had never been wrong, or who simply never admitted it. You meet him by chance, standing beside a stream that barely remembers being a river. He's sharpening his longsword, slowly, with a whetstone made of obsidian. You comment that obsidian doesn't do much for steel? He doesn't look up. It's for memory, not metal. Of course it is. You sit. He lets you. You ask him, eventually, about the bolts. Why the refusal? He smiles genuinely, almost warmly. A weapon that kills at distance, kills the soul first. I prefer to meet death face to face. You try not to laugh? You fail. He shrugs. Most do. And yet, he wasn't a fool. He knew the world had changed. He'd fought in skirmishes where bolts rained like locusts. He'd seen friends skewered before drawing their swords. But to him, that was proof of his path, not its undoing. If you make yourself harder to kill, they'll just invent a new way. He mutters, but if you make yourself impossible to fear, he trails off. You get it. Maybe. Knights like Aurelian weren't born of practicality. They were born of performance. Symbols wrapped in muscle and plate. Their deaths were usually tragic and completely avoidable, but their lives became stories people remembered. There's a scroll somewhere, 13th century, attributed to a monk named Galbertius, that recounts a duel Aurelian fought during a border dispute between two bishoprics. The enemy brought a loaded crossbow. Aurelian brought a wooden practice sword. He won. Barely. Mostly because the crossbow jammed. God smiled on the foolish. Galbertius wrote, but I suspect even God sighed when he did. Historians still argue whether the duel happened. Some say it was a metaphor. Others say it was a farce inflated by wine. But the lesson-stuck courage can inspire or get you shot. Depends on the angle. Quirky side note. Aurelian was set to coat his armor with rose oil before battle. Not for protection. For smell? If ID. He once told a squire, let them say, I fell fragrant. You spend the evening listening to him talk about old campaigns. Dead comrades. And a horse named Calamus, who once bit a bishop. When the fire dies down, he draws his blade not to clean it, just to look at it. You can't help but unsling your sword. He notices. He nods. A blade with weight. You nod back. And hunger. Neither of you sleep much. In the morning, Aurelian stands and straps on his armor. The sun paints gold on steel. He picks up his sword, ignores the small pouch of bolts someone left as an offering, and walks into the mist. You never see him again. But later, much later, when someone mentions him in a tavern, you say nothing. You just glance at your sword, and it feels slightly heavier, like it remembers him too. It's dusk when the stone begins to shake. Not tremble, not quake, just hum. Deep, steady resonance that pulses up through your boots and settles in your ribs like a slow drumbeat. You've felt something like it before. Cathedral bells tolling in the belly of the city. Distant thunder while lying in the grass. But this is deeper. Older. You've reached the gates? Not of a city. Not of a fortress, but of a place people stopped mapping centuries ago, Belivar. Once a Roman granary outpost. Later, a rebellious barony. And now, just stone teeth in the earth. The name survives in whispers and the occasional tax dispute, and in its walls, gunpowder. The scent is unmistakable as you enter the shattered gate. Sulfur, charcoal, saltpeter, all clinging to the air like a memory. No one agreed to forget. You duck under a collapsed arch and find them rows of iron tubes, propped against sandbags and crumbling parapets. Early muskets. Ancien. Ancient. Clunky. And terrifying. You pick one up. It's heavier than expected. A metal pipe welded crudely to a wooden stock. The entire thing looking like it might explode if you even breathe wrong. Which, frankly, is historically accurate. Handguns were among the first firearms in Europe, the precursors to the musket. They were basically hollow iron rods loaded with black powder and a ball, ignited by a glowing match or smoldering fuse. Firing one wasn't just risky, it was an act of optimism. Sometimes they worked. Sometimes they exploded. Sometimes they just hissed smoke and disappointment. You spot the firing holes, small touch holes at the rear, meant to be lit by match cords. The entire process required steady hands and a deep willingness to ignore the fact that your face was roughly 3 inches from a controlled explosion, warfare's equivalent of a trust fall. You load one, because of course you do. Slowly, carefully. Powder first, then wadding, then the iron ball. More wadding, then tamp it down with the ramrod, which is bent slightly comforting. You light a match from a nearby brazier, hold it steady, you fire. It goes off. A deafening crack, a cloud of sulfur, and a kick that punches your shoulder like a mule with daddy issues. The ball hits a distant chunk of stone, shattering it. Not bad. You still have eyebrows. Bonus. The locals probably heard that for miles. Muskets' early ones, at least, weren't about accuracy. They were about noise. Smoke. Shaush. Psychological warfare wrapped in fire and noise. Entire enemy lines sometimes scattered before a single hit landed. Because imagine being used to swords and arrows and suddenly someone's bringing thunder. That's why these weapons mattered. Not just the impact. The impression. There's an old letter from a German mercenary, dated around 1390, describing the first time he saw a handgun fired. He wrote, "It was like God coughed in the enemy's direction." You hope he wasn't standing in front of it. Historians still argue whether early gunpowder was a revolutionary game changer or a psychological gimmick until metallurgy caught up. But most agree it marked the beginning of the end for walled cities, plate armor, and battlefield poetry. You fire again. This time, the gun jams. Smoke pours from the barrel's end. You drop it fast. Too fast. It hits the stone with a clunk and doesn't explode. Miraculous. You sit beside it, ears ringing, and catch your breath. There's soot on your face. Your hands are trembling not with fear, but with the echo of force. You've held swords, spears, crossbows. But this is something else. This isn't a weapon you wield. It's one you release. You glance toward your sword. It sits sheathed at your side. Quiet, but not indifferent. For the first time, it feels like you're cheating on it. Like it knows this was a different language and one you're starting to learn. Quirky side detail. Some early handgun users wore padded hats, not for protection, but because the shockwave messed with their balance. One French account even describes a musketeer who vomited every time he fired. He still made captain. You clean the barrel with a cloth that smells like ash and regret. Then you do something strange. You thank the weapon, not because it helped you, not because you're superstitious, just because something that dangerous deserves to be acknowledged. The sky darkens. You leave the ruined fort behind. The echo of gunfire still dancing in your ears. Your sword, a little colder on your back. But you know something now. The world has changed, and it isn't slowing down for anyone. The smoke trails behind you like a second shadow. You've left Belovar and its half-dead muskets. But the scent of black powder clings to your cloak, curls into your hair, and ghosts your breath. Every time you exhale, it's like you're remembering that fire again. Your shoulder still aches from the recoil. You're starting to think it always will. The road stretches out ahead, quiet. Until it's not, you feel the thunder before you hear it. A low, percussive rhythm. Distant, but regular. Not hoofbeats. Not drums. It's something deeper. You crest a hill and look down, and there they are, marching in columns. Surrounded by smoke, even though the air is clear, the gunners, early musket formations. Armored in mismatched pieces. Faces soot-streaked. Hands black with powder residue. And every few seconds, imperfect, terrifying harmony. Boom. A cloud. Another line steps forward. Boom. Repeat. You've never seen war move like this. They're not fighting a battle. They're practicing for one. This is a drill, and it already looks like the end of the world. A sergeant paces along the line, barking orders in Italianate Latin. Someone's match cord won't light. Someone else reloads too slowly. The sergeant kicks him in the thigh. Gently. Like encouragement. Sort of. You watch from behind a ruined archway as the line reforms again. This time, they fire in volleys. 3 ranks deep. First row kneels. Second fires over their shoulders. Third waits. Eyes cold. Breath steady. Boom, boom, boom. This isn't battle anymore. It's choreography. Historically, volley fire like this began taking shape in the 15th and 16th centuries, evolving from messy clusters into organized, layered death. The medieval Roman revivalist armies, especially those under quasi-Holy Roman states, borrowed from older legion tactics, but remixed them with powder and noise. Scholars still debate whether this fusion of drill and fire was truly effective early on, or more intimidating than lethal. But from where you stand, it's both. You move closer, and you notice something peculiar. The gunners are humming, low, tuneless, but unified, like monks preparing for vespers. One foot steps forward. One powder horn opens. One ramrod slams. One trigger snaps. The song never breaks. You speak to one of them during a break. He's missing a finger and smells like charred leather. You ask about the humming. It keeps the rhythm, he says, stops us from rushing. You rush. You misfire. You misfire. You. D. Sempremat. Quirky side note. One 15th century manual suggested gunners sing psalms between volleys to preserve breath and spirit. A captain in Bavaria went one step further. He taught his men madrigals. His unit became famous, not just for deadly aim, but for oddly beautiful harmonies before every charge. You sit with them as they clean their barrels, long rods dipped in oil, wiping out ash and old violence. One gunner shows you a small leather pouch tied to his belt. Inside beeswax, a saint medallion, and dried rose petals. For piece of aim, he says, you nod. Like that makes perfect sense. Then someone offers you a gun. Not as a gift, as a test. You take it. Heavy. Muzzle. Scarred with use. The lock mechanism is newer, more advanced than the one at Belivar. You load carefully, trying to recall the steps. Powder. Wad. Ball. More wad. Tamp it. Prime the pan. Light the match. The gunner nods once. You aim. Boom. This time, your shoulder doesn't scream. Your ears ring a little less. The cloud of smoke seems more like a friend. You hand the weapon back. The gunner doesn't smile. Just says, you have a good arm. For someone with a sword. Ah. The sword. You'd almost forgotten. It rests against your side now. Not jealous. Not resentful. But quiet. Watching. It's a strange thing. To carry the future in your hands and the past on your back. One breathes smoke. The other hums steel. You leave the gunners before sunset. They'll march through the night, humming their death song into the dark. You walk the opposite way, and when you finally stop to rest, you unsling the sword, just to hold it. You whisper. You still matter. The blade hums faintly, as if to say, I know. The trail curves down into a forgotten orchard, where rows of skeletal trees reach toward the sky like pleading hands. You follow the path out of habit more than direction. There are no signs here, just mossy stones and the occasional arrowhead half buried in dirt. And somewhere in the silence, you hear it. A pop, then a fizzle, then a crack. You drop to a crouch out of instinct. Not fear, just familiarity. You recognize that noise. It's a musket misfire. You crawl forward and find him behind a toppled cart, a boy, no older than 16. Soot on his cheeks, tears in his eyes, and a handgun that's actively smoking. His fingers are blistered. The match cord is hanging loose. There's a small burn mark on his sleeve. He's breathing in tiny gasps. Like a trapped animal. You kneel beside him. Hey, Yuck's back. You hold up a hand. Palm out. Showing you're not here to scold, just to not let him explode. Misfires were a constant companion in early gunpowder warfare. Poor powder quality. Damp wadding. Warped barrels. All of them could turn a weapon into a pipe bomb, or worse. Silendude. Sometimes the gun didn't go off until minutes later. Surprise. You check the handgun gently. It's old, heavy, made with inconsistent casting ridges on the inside that could catch powder. You tilt it. Listen to the faint sizzle still emanating from the pan. Don't move. You whisper. He doesn't. You wedge a small stick between the trigger and the pan, just in case. Then you grab a wet cloth from your pouch. Yes? You carry one now. Ever since Belivar, and smother the pan gently. The sizzling stops. You both exhale like survivors. He finally speaks. It was my first time. You nod. First times usually end with smoke and regret. He chuckles. Weakly. You take the musket apart. Slowly. No sudden movements. You explain each step, wipe the excess powder from the vent, knock the barrel gently to check for cracks. He watches like a student too, scared to ask questions. This wasn't just a failed shot. It was a lesson with very real consequences. Quirky fact in some towns. Early musketeers had to wear failure hoods for public training, mishaps a donkey-eared cowl symbolizing poor maintenance. One village even stitched the words "boomer no boom" across the back. Mean-spirited. Yes. Effective. Also yes. You hand the musket back. Try again tomorrow. You say? He shakes his head. I think I'll go back to the Baker's Guild. You grin. Probably safer. You stand to leave, but he calls after you. You carry a sword. You nod. Does it misfire? You pose. No. You say, but it still chooses when to listen. He frowns. That makes no sense. It will. You walk on, and as you go, the sword at your back feels warm again, not hot, not angry, just present, like a mentor, quietly approving your choice not to scold, not to mock, but to guide. You remember a story from an old Chronicle Anonymous, written in the margin of a battle report. It spoke of a knight who trained musketeers in secret, even while refusing to use guns himself. The blade cannot become the barrel. He said, but it can stand beside it. Historians still argue whether he ever existed, whether the quote is real, whether any knight ever held both honor and gunpowder in the same heart. But walking through this orchard of broken limbs and missed shots, you think maybe he did? Or maybe you're becoming him. You stop for a moment, unsling the sword, and for the first time in days, you draw it fully. The metal catches no light, but reflects everything. A distant crow calls, and the world goes quiet again. The path curls into a low ravine, sunken and cool, where shadows hang like tapestries and roots claw through stone. You've walked for hours, maybe days. Time slips when you're chasing ghosts with steel and smoke. The sword rides easy on your back now. Its weight familiar. Like an old scar, you stop trying to hide. The musket, you left that with the boy. Better that way? The wind shifts. You smell incense. And not the gentle temple kind, the bitter stuff. Charred resin. Myrrh and crushed bone. The kind burned at exorcisms and war councils. You move cautiously. Boots whispering over damp earth. Until you reach a clearing, and you see it. A stone altar cracked but upright, ringed by wooden frames hung with relics. Not the kind you find in glass cases. Mind you, these are weapons. Broken ones. Spears snapped at the shaft. Sword hilts scorched. A flail with half its chain rusted away. All of them arranged like offerings, each crowned by a burning taper. And behind it all, a priest. No, not a priest. A friar? barefoot. Robes tattered, but with eyes that reflect fire. He's smiling, and it's unclear whether it's because he's peaceful or simply unbothered by death. He's cradling something in his lap. Small, angular, metal. A musket, polished, adorned, blessed. He sees you. Doesn't flinch. Are you the one who speaks to your sword? He asks. You pose. Sometimes. He nods, as if that's the correct answer. He rises. Slow and deliberate. The musket in his hands gleams with brass inlay. A Latin phrase runs down the barrel. In tenebris, fulgor fidei. In darkness, the flash of faith. This, he says, is the gun that stopped the siege at Montbrevet? You blink. That name is legend. A monastery surrounded, monks trapped. Supplie dwindling. A single shot rang out on the third night. A general died. The army retreated. Nobody ever found the shooter. I thought that was myth. You say, he shrugs. Isn't everything until someone pulls the trigger? The friar isn't boastful. He's reverent. He speaks of powder, like wine, of barrels like bones, of bullets like prayers waiting to be released. You're not sure if he's dangerous or just devout. Possibly both. I don't fire unless I've bled for it. He says, you nod. He offers you the gun. You hesitate. You should know how it feels. He adds, to hold a miracle. You take it? It's lighter than you expect. Balanced. The inlays don't scream. They whisper. The stock fits perfectly into your shoulder. And yet you don't feel anything holy. You feel decisions. This is what people forget. Holy weapons don't glow. They don't float. They wait. And when you touch them, they don't judge. They reveal your thoughts, your doute, your capacity. You hand the musket back. The friar nods. Pleased. You're not ready to carry it. Will I be only if you stop wanting to? He turns back to the altar and begins relighting the candles that had blown out while you spoke. One by one, carefully, you sit beside a broken halberd and watch the flames return. Quirky note, some friars carried miniaturized muskets in hollowed-out books. One was caught smuggling gunpowder into a cathedral disguised as incense. His defense, I was lighting a more efficient path to God. The sword at your back hums gently, as if amused, as if it knows that even in the presence of holy fire and sanctified gunpowder, it still holds something the others don't. Memory. You leave the friar in peace. He doesn't look up, but as you vanish into the trees, you hear one last whisper from behind you. Remember, even a sacred trigger leaves a corpse. You don't look back. You travel lighter now, not because your pack is any emptier, it isn't, but because your steps no longer carry the same kind of weight. Not the kind that crushes, the kind that knows what it's walking toward. Ahead lies the town of Gravenholt, once a fortress. Now, more of a suggestion of one. The walls still stand, but barely. Stones lean. Gates creak open without resistance. Ivy does most of the security work. You're not here for protection. Anyway, you're here for proof. They say inside Gravenholt is a reliquary, and inside the reliquary is something strange. Not a sword. Not a musket. Not a crossbow. But a bomb. Small, ornate, etched with holy symbols, carved to resemble a relic capsule. One of those little golden things you'd find saints' knuckle bones inside. But this one explodes. You find the chapel tucked into the northern wall. Long abandoned. Pews overturned. Glass shattered. Crows roost in the rafters. But the reliquary still stands locked in a glass case behind a rusted grate. The object inside looks innocent. Gleaming bronze. Filigreed edges. A cross at the top. And a faint, dark stain running down one side like old wine. You break the glass. Because of course you do. It's heavier than it looks. Cold. Denser. Intentional. You feel it in your palm. A quiet tension. Like holding breath. There's no fuse. Just a pressure plate at the base. You don't press it. You sit down. Palm in your lap. And let the silence settle. This isn't a weapon born from battlefield tradition. It's born from desperation. From invention. From the moment someone said, "What if we made holiness explode?" Historians still argue whether these saint bombs were ever used. Some claim they were prototypes. Others say they were psychological tools planted in enemy altars to scare troops. One record. From a papal courier. Even claims one was used to assassinate an anti-bishop during Mass. The bomb was hidden in the offering plate. The collection was generous that day. And fatal. You find a name etched around the base in looping Latin Sanctus Servat Nisi Offendatur. The saint protects unless offended. You look at your sword. Lying beside you. It's quiet. Watching. Weighing. You wonder what it thinks of this? Of a weapon that pretends to be holy so it can kill harder. Quirky side story 1. Monk reportedly designed these devices using stolen Byzantine schematics and a lot of trial and error. He lost 3 fingers and gained a reputation. They called him Father Boom. You cradle the device for a while? Long enough to stop flinching. Then, carefully, you bury it. Not deep, just enough that the earth remembers where it lies. You mark the grave with a coin. No, inscription. Just wait. Some things don't need to be found again. When you rise, the sword hums once faintly. Not in anger. Not in pride. In relief. You sling it over your back, step into the darkening day, and walk. Not toward violence. Not toward peace. Just forward. The sun bleeds gold as you cross into the cloisters of San Virello. A monastery now half abandoned and mostly rumor. Ivy crawls up its bell towers. The fountain in the courtyard murmurs with algae-thick water. But the stained glass intact, vibrant, shimmering with the last rays of evening. You stop in the nave. There are footsteps behind you, but when you turn, there's no one. Just air thick with incense and dust. And then steel rings. A blade unsheathed. You step forward into the center aisle and see them. 2 figures locked in combat. Their movements crisp. Silent. Not rage. Not chaos ritual. One wields a longsword, heavy and etched with monastic runes. The other a rapier, thin as a whisper and twice as fast. They circle one another like dance partners who forgot who leads. You recognize the duel before the first strike lands. This is cloister combat. A tradition older than most would admit where monks trained not just to debate scripture, but to defend relics. Where duels were not condemned, but consecrated. where blood spilled on holy ground was considered, in rare cases, purifying. You sit in the pews, silent, watching. The first strike is slow, deliberate. Steel meets steel in a hush of friction. No grunts, no gasps, only discipline. Klueste kumba, ohadu, puginai, was reserved for internal disputes among religious orders, especially when sacred artifacts, theological heresies, or doctrinal power struggles turned too volatile for parchment and pen. The duels weren't advertised. They were remembered. Historians still debate their legitimacy. Some call them glorified bar brawls in cassocks. Others argue they were sacred extensions of canonical law. A few treatises survive. One from the Abbey of Luro details 12 accepted strikes and an entire chapter on when to stop before martyrdom. The fighters break apart. The longsword wielder kneels. The rapier dips in salute. The fight is done. They vanish into side corridors without ever acknowledging you. You're not sure they saw you. You rise slowly and approach the altar. Beneath it lies the Ark of Armis, a chest whispered about in footnotes and fringe theology, said to contain records of every duel fought within these cloisters since the 8th century. You open it. Inside scrolls, stained and cracked. One name repeats more than the others. Lucian of the Silent Order. Fought 7 duels. Won 6. Lost the last. To his student. The margin note reads, "As was proper, you sit beside the chest and draw your own sword." It doesn't gleam here. It glows. Not with light. With purpose. It knows this place, this tradition, this silence. You run a finger along the edge. The blade sings quietly. When you do, quirky fact, some monks train to duel using singing. Literally, their footwork was guided by chant rhythm. A Gregorian Peri, a psalmic feint. There's even a manuscript that claims a fighter once disarmed his opponent mid-hymn. You sheath the sword. It resists just slightly, as if asking, one match. Just one. But you decline. You leave the cloisters with scroll dust on your fingertips and stained glass still catching your back. Outside, the moon rises pale and full, and for the first time in days, your footsteps echo alone. No smoke. No gunfire. Just breath, and the memory of steel striking steel beneath painted saints. You don't plan to walk into a rebellion. But then again, no one ever does. The village of Varnholt seems peaceful enough at first. Lanterns sway in the dusk breeze. Dogs bark in the distance. Children chase each other between stalls. But the way the merchants glance over their shoulders, the way old men gather in silence outside shuttered churches, it tells a different story. Something's brewing. You step into the square and spot it immediately the weapon. Not on a soldier. Not on a knight. On a farmer. A halberd. Tall. Cracked at the base, but still sharp enough to ruin someone's decade. You watch him lean on it like a walking stick. But his grip's too tight. His eyes too focused. He's waiting. And not alone. Others carry weapons too. Not swords. Not crossbows. Polearms. Mismatched. Homemade. Improvised. A long rake haft turned into a makeshift glaive. A butcher's cleaver lashed to a broomstick. A garden fork honed into a partisan This isn't an army. It's a crowd that got tired of being quiet. You've stepped into a rebellion, fueled by polearms. Polearms, catch-all term for long thing with a sharp bit, with a people's weapon. Cheap to make. Easier to use than swords. Deadly, in a group. They were the anti-knight tool of choice. In medieval Roman-influenced regions, especially where old imperial taxes still haunted farmlands, uprisings often started with a halberd in a tavern. Historically, the weapon let the weak hold ground. One man with a halberd couldn't do much, but 50 in a square formation, you could stop cavalry. You could hold a street. You could make someone listen. And that's what Varnholt is trying to do tonight. You speak to one of the rebels, a woman with arms like twisted rope, scars on her temple, and a spearhead bound to a fence post. She tells you they raised the toll again. Said it was for the Emperor's Road. We haven't seen a new stone in 10 years. You ask what happens now. She shrugs. We hold the square. We show them we're not ornaments. That'll be enough. You both know it won't. The tax riders will come with swords, muskets, orders, maybe a priest to bless the beatings. And this crowd, it'll break. Or burn. You could walk away. This isn't your fight. You weren't summoned. You weren't wronged. But you stay. Because you see a boy holding a pike upside down? Because you see a grandmother strapping a frying pan to her chest like armor? Because someone offers you a halberd, and you take it not to swing, to stand. Quirky detail. In one town's revolt, Walstadt, 1,473 rebels painted their halberds white and named them Justice. Bread? No more. One was named Goose. For reasons unknown, it disappeared into history after a noble fell on it sideways. The sun sets. The town square glows with torches. The riders appear on the hill cloaked, mounted, armored. They don't speak. They just wait, and for a moment, so do you? Then, from behind, someone starts humming. A low tune, maybe a prayer, maybe just nerves. Others join in. Not lyrics, just sound. A polearm army humming into the dark. You don't know the melody, but you hum anyway. The riders dismount. This is going to hurt. The sword at your back shifts. It doesn't hum. It waits. Not for glory, not for blue, for your decision. And you plant your halberd, grip it with both hands, and hold. Dawn never really rises over Varnholt. It just creeps. The smoke still clings to the rooftops like bad memories. And the cobblestones are sticky with ash and blood, but there's silence now. Not peace. Just aftermath. The kind where everyone left counts heads, counts breath, counts the seconds until they believe they're actually alive. You're alive. Barely. Your halberd splintered halfway through the fight. You don't remember when. Maybe when you braced against the charge. Maybe when you used the shaft to block a sword swing that cracked your wrist in your patience. The last thing you recall clearly is falling, not from a wound, from exhaustion. The rebels scattered. Hurt, but not broken. The tax riders retreated. Not routed. Not slain, but surprised. Not by skill, by stubbornness. That's what polearms buy you. A fighting chance. You rise slowly, rubbing the bruise on your side where a mace had strong opinions. A few villagers nod to you. One presses a hot roll into your hand. You eat without thinking. Bread test is different after battle. Heavier, holier. Or maybe you're just glad your teeth still work. You retrieve your sword. It lay untouched through the whole fight, wrapped in cloth, tied to your back. You didn't draw it not once. The entire skirmish played out at the end of a longer reach. But now, as your fingers close around the grip, the blade feels aware, not insulted, interested. There's something to that. The sword has always been the noble weapon, the officer's badge, the symbol of duels and decrees. Polearms, that's for the people. That's for lines. For holding, for saying no farther. Historians still argue whether rebellions like Varnholt's ever succeeded in more than sentiment. Some were crushed in weeks. Others sparked new taxes. A few earned a charter or two, but none were forgotten. Especially the ones where farmers stood shoulder to shoulder and dared knights to try them. There's a halberd laid on the chapel steps, now split. Burnt. Sacred in its ruin. You run a hand down the splintered shaft and nod. You'll remember this one. Quirky fact. In a minor peasant revolt, in 1420, a militia smuggled halberds by disguising them as maypoles for a festival. They were caught when someone noticed the decorations were unusually sharp. The parade turned into a riot. No one remembers who won. But a song about it still survives. Sung with tankards and too much ale. You start to leave, but a child tugs your sleeve. She's maybe 8. Air matted. Knee scraped. She holds out a polearm head, just the blade. Broken clean at the socket. Rusted. Jagged. I found it. She says, you take it. Not because it's useful, because it's real. You tie it to your belt, then turn east. The road ahead winds toward a monastery burned in a forgotten war. And rumor says, a blade sleeps beneath its ruins, a blade forged in penance and cooled in the blood of deserters. You don't know if it's true, but your sword is warm again. It wants to find out. So you walk, not quickly, not proudly, just forward, and behind you, the villagers sweep the streets, one halberd at a time. The monastery doesn't appear on any map, but you find it anyway, half collapsed, spine bent, ribcage cracked open to the sky. Vines have claimed the cloisters. The bell tower lists like a drunk sailor. But something remains, not just stone. Memory, the kind that hums in your bones before you cross the threshold. Your sword hums too. Get focused, like a dog scenting blood. This is San Mortem, not its real name. That was lost. Locals call it San Mortem, because something died here. Faith? Maybe. Or forgiveness. Legend says a brotherhood of warrior monks once called it home. That they trained in silence. That they each forged a blade, not for war, but to repent for one. You step into the nave. It's silent. The altar has collapsed. Sunlight spills through holes in the ceiling, laying pale gold over shattered pews. And there it is, half buried in the cracked flagstones. A sword, point down, hilt scorched, gart bent, but unmistakable. You kneel, brush away the dirt. The blade is unlike yours. Shorter, broader, forged more for penance than for flourish, and etched into the metal, down the fuller, the words, "I judged myself." No name. No history. Just that. You grasp the hilt. It's cold. It doesn't sing. It waits. You lift it. Dust falls away. The blade catches light and refuses to reflect your face. Just the room behind you. You feel suddenly watched, and you are. 6 stone statues line the walls, cloaked in shadow. Not saints, sinners. Each one holds a weapon spear, flail, axe, bow, sling, crossbow, all lowered, all aimed at the floor, all identical in expression, eyes closed, as if refusing to see what they once did. This was no ordinary monastery. This was an armory of atonement. Some believe monks here took a vow to unmake violence with the memory of it. They trained with weapons not to wield, but to carry them broken, dulled, symbolic. Historians still argue if this was real or romanticized. But there's one letter dated 1312 where a pilgrim writes, "They say the brothers of Mortem sleep beneath swords heavier than their sins." Quirky fact. A monk from this order supposedly crafted a blade, so guilt-ridden, it bent in its owner's hands whenever unsheathed in anger. It was called Ashline. No one knows where it is now. Probably with someone who still doesn't understand it. You stand with the new sword in hand. Your old one on your back? They don't clash. They balance. 2 paths. One for doing, one for remembering. You leave the monastery quietly. No fire. No echo. Just you and a blade that once knelt in stone for decades without moving. You don't know if it's holy, but it feels forgiven. That night, you camp in the ruins of a garden choked with ivy. The sword from San Mortem rests beside you. Your old sword stays sheathed. And for once, neither of them hums. Because tonight isn't about war. It's about rest. Sleep doesn't last. It never does when the past has weight. You wake before dawn. Not from sound, but from pressure. The kind that curls around your ribs and squeezes gently. Like memory. Or prophecy. The 2 swords lie crossed beside you, your old one humming faintly in the darkness. The San Mortem blade still and silent like a grave that never needed a headstone. You rise, roll your shoulders, and listen. Something's off. Not danger expectation. You follow it, down a deer, path slick with morning dew, through tangled underbrush and into a ravine veined with dry roots and shattered stone. There, hidden between 2 leaning oaks, is a shrine, or what's left of it. A ring of broken walls, a half statue of a saint with no face, and in the center, a child, not alive, not breathing, but not dead either. You recognize the pose? Kneeling, hands clasped, eyes open, but glassy. Still, it's a practice figure, a training dummy carved from wax and bone, used in ancient rites where warriors once honed their mercy. They weren't made to fight. They were made to test restraint. You step into the ring. The air tightens. The child's figure rises not fluidly, mechanically. Arms clicking into position. Head tilting with an eerie jerk. In one hand, a wooden blade. In the other, nothing. A test. This is the trial of temperance. You've heard of it. Maybe in a footnote. Maybe in a dream. A ritual designed by a forgotten order, where warriors faced childlike forms that mimicked fear, vulnerability, hesitation. The test wasn't to win. It was to withhold, to fight without striking. You grip your sword, but not the old one. San Mortem's blade slides free with no sound. It feels lighter today. Or maybe your hands finally understand its weight. The figure lunges. You step aside. It swings again. Fast. Inhuman. The blade is dull. But the form is perfect. Too perfect. You dodge. Again. Again. You could strike. Easily. One slash and the test would end. But it wouldn't be a pass. It would be failure dressed as efficiency. Historians still argue whether the trial was a symbolic purge or a genuine training method. Some called it barbaric. Others, brilliant. A few insisted it was psychological warfare against the self. You move slower now. Let the figure swing. You redirect. Disarm without cutting. Block without bruising. Sweat beads at your brow. And then, quiet, the figure lowers its arms. And bows, the trial ends. Not with victory, with patience. You kneel, plant the San Mortem blade into the dirt. The wax figure crumbles. Gently, like dry petals in the wind. You return to camp and sling the blade across your back, beside your own. They rest together now. Not rivals. Not replacements. Different songs in the same hymn. Quirky note. In one region, warriors who passed the trial were given no medals. Instead, their names were sung once at dusk by the Abbey choir. Never recorded. Just released into the wind. A victory with no echo. You walk east again. The road widens. Not with stone, with possibility. The sword hums. San Mortem's stay still. And both feel like truth. The wind carries laughter. Sharp. Harsh. Hollow. It echoes down the canyon pass. You are now walking carved by water centuries ago. Now, nothing but dust and shale. The laugh doesn't belong to joy. It belongs to certainty. The kind you only hear from someone who knows they've already won. You reach the clearing at the bend. And there they are. 3 figures, all armored, all masked, all still. Except for one, who's winding something between their hands. A bolt? Longer than usual. Barbet. Its shaft painted red. You recognize the color, not decoration. Message. It means this shot is personal. The one holding it leather cloak. Short bow slung across his shoulder. Crossbow loaded in one hand grins like someone who's read your ending already. Thought you'd be taller. He says, you don't answer. Your hands find the hilt of your sword. The others draw crossbows. No fanfare, just intent. This is not a battle. It's an execution. You move sideways, behind a boulder. Crouch low. Assess. The terrain is open for them. Narrow for you. Classic setup, bait you down the canyon. Then, box you in. You scan for cover sparse. Your best shot speed. Distraction. And maybe a little noise. You unsling the San Mortem sword, not to fight, to plant. You drive the blade into the ground behind your cover. The handle gleams in the low light. A symbol. Let them think you've discarded it. You draw your old sword. It hums like it's waking from a long nap with violent intent. Then, you run. A bolt cracks beside your cheek. Another punches into the rock behind you. You twist, slide, strike. One down. You don't see his face. Don't need to. You only need his weapon. Crossbow. Loaded. You fire. It hits not flesh. Leather. But hard enough to drop the second one to a knee. The third's already aiming. You throw the crossbow. He flinches. You charge. Close quarters now. He draws a dagger. Longes. Your sword sings once. It doesn't cut. It ends. Silence returns. You breathe. Once. Twice. Then, walk back to the planted San Morton blade, still upright, still unbothered. You wipe your hands, slide it back into its sheath. Not every fight is for both swords. This one belonged to rage, but you honored restraint? 2. You didn't kill when you didn't have to. Quirky side fact. In one rogue's diary from 1449, he boasts of dodging 100 arrows in a canyon ambush. Historians scoff until they found the canyon. And the bodies? Turns out, sometimes legend just forgets to mention the swordsmanship. You climb out of the canyon slowly. The sun setting behind you. Both blades now silent. Neither proud, only present. Like wolves, walking beside you. Invisible, but ready. The next bend brings another path. And you follow? Because laughter in a canyon is just an echo. But purpose that walks beside you. The next village greets you with barricades. Not the wooden spike kind. The furniture kind. Chairs nailed into tables. Beds propped against doorframes. Someone's used an organ bench to seal the town gate. It creaks in protest as you ease it open. No one stops you, because no one is here. The entire village feels abandoned. Lanterns still lit. Soup still steaming on windowsills, but the people gone. Then you hear it. Boom. Faint, far off, but unmistakable. You follow it. Up a winding lane. Past the chapel. Past the empty granary. To the top of a hill where an old watchtower stands alone against the sky. And there, at the summit, you find them, a musket crew. 3 figures, covered in soot. One loading, one aiming, one praying. Their cannon not large enough for a proper siege, not small enough to carry without regrets, is pointed down the valley, toward a stone bridge. At the center of that bridge, a wagon, rolling slowly, covered in red silk. The loader looks up at you, blinking smoke from her eyes. Messenger, she says. You ask? For who? She just nods toward the wagon. For everyone. You don't know what that means. Then she steps back, and the gunner lights the match. Boom. Smoke. Thunder. Recoil. The wagon explodes, but not in fire. In light. Bright. White. Blinding. You stagger. Shield your eyes. Blink the stars away. When the smoke clears, the bridge is empty. No bodies. No wagon. Just silence. What was that, you ask? The loader shrugs. A holy charge. Blessed powder. Not to kill, to cleanse. You blink. Did it work? No idea. She says, they don't come back after. You sit down beside the barrel. It's warm. Humming slightly, like it remembers thunder. Blessed gunpowder isn't a myth. Records show popes occasionally blessed powder stocks before crusades. Once, during the siege of Almohavre, priests were said to sprinkle holy water over cannonballs. Historians still argue whether it was symbolic or chemical. Some suggest the water had saltpeter mixed in, more alchemist than angel. You examine a second barrel nearby. It's marked with a sigil, a sunburst over a skull. Not ominous at all. What happens now, you ask? Reload, says the loader. You nod. Begin helping, because it's not always about understanding the weapon. Sometimes it's about standing beside it. You pack powder, wipe sweat. Listen to the prayers muttered between shots. Not to heaven, to the musket. They speak to it like an old friend, with terrible ideas. And you start to get it, because sometimes faith doesn't come from silence. It comes from sound. Quirky fact. In one archived sermon from the city of Bern, a bishop declared, gunpowder is the wrath of heaven. Caged in earth. He was later fined for inciting panic. But he wasn't wrong. You leave the tower after 3 volleys. Your ears ring, your hands shake, but the air feels lighter. The village is still empty, but it feels watched, protected, like something dark passed through and was turned away. You walk on, 2 swords at your back. And now, a powder stain on your chest. You reach the crossroads by dusk, where 3 stones mark the junction like forgotten teeth. No signs, no markers, just deep-cut ruts, scorched in places. One path leads to the mountains dark and jagged, another to the marshes. Low and whispering, the third, to a city wall that's no longer standing. You walk toward the ruin. Once, this was Valarnum, fortress proud, church blessed, ringed with towers and arrogance. Now it's rubble, its gates shattered like clay pots, its spires burned to stumps, and the people still here, but silent. They stand in the streets, hundreds of them, not speaking, not moving, each one holding a weapon, not drawn, just held. You move through them slowly. A boy with a broken spear, a woman with a crossbow tied together with twine, an old man clutching a rusted saber by the scabbard like he's afraid of what might happen if he actually uses it. Then you see the reason. At the city center stands a platform. On it a throne, carved from cannon pots, lined with swords melted into place. At its center, draped in chainmail and red silk, sits a corpse. Not decomposed, not rotting, used, still. As if judgment arrived and then forgot to follow through. The body clutches a weapon. You approach. A gilded musket, too ornate, too final. A name etched in the barrel, Judicium, judgment. The musket isn't loaded. It's sealed. Barrel packed with wax and bone dust. Trigger, bound by silver wire. This isn't a weapon anymore. It's a warning. 1. No one here is willing to ignore. You speak to a girl near the throne. She doesn't blink. doesn't move. You ask who he was? She whispers, the one who ended the siege. You ask what happened. He fired once. She says, the gates fell. The sky turned red. And he sat down. You nod. You don't ask what the shot hit. Sometimes, the answer is less useful than the pause that follows. Historians call it a myth. The one-shot fall of Valarnam. No proof. No records. Just conflicting diaries and a collapsed town. No one wants to reclaim. Scholars argue whether the gun ever existed. Whether judgment was a metaphor. Whether it was all just fear that wrote itself into history. But you're looking at it right now. And it's real. Quirky footnote in one archived letter. A general confessed that his army never reached Valarnam, not because of resistance, but because we heard a song in the hills, and our horses refused to walk. The song, no one ever wrote it down. Or, if they did, they never survived to sing it twice. You reach for the musket, not to take it, to touch it. It's cold. Impossibly so. Your breath fogs. Your own sword warms instantly, as if to protest. You pull your hand back, and for a moment, you feel like someone just aimed something at you. You nod, whisper a word you don't know, and walk away. The crowd never moves. The corpse never stirs. But as you leave the square, the air behind you shifts, like a musket's hammer being gently, reverently reset. You don't look back. You don't breathe until the wall is out of sight. Night falls heavy and slow. The sky is a blanket stitched with stars, each one distant and indifferent. You find yourself by a river's edge, where water whispers over rocks and the world feels briefly at peace. Your feet are sore, your hands stained with history. Your sword rests heavy at your side. But peace is a stranger here. Across the water, a faint glow flickers. A campfire, a beacon. You can't tell. The night plays tricks with shadows and light. But curiosity draws you closer. You cross a fallen log, careful not to slip, and step into the clearing. A gathering. Soldiers, rebels, ghosts. They sit in circles, sharing bread and stories, passing bottles and laughter. None seem hostile. None seem surprised to see you. Their weapons lean against trees, spears, swords, crossbows, muskets all mingled, like an arsenal of the ages. You settle on the ground, letting the quiet wash over you. An old man nods your way. His eyes are bright with memory. You carry many stories. He says, you nod, and many swords. He chuckles. Then you know this war is not just fought with steel. It's fought with hearts. They talk then of battles, losses, victories that never made chronicles, of weapons passed down through blood and fire, of the weight a sword carries beyond its edge. One young soldier lifts a battered halberd. My father gave me this, said it would keep me alive. I hope he was right. Another cradles a musket, scarred and patched. My mother prayed over the powder, said the saints would guide the shot. You share tales of your sword, the chapel, the forge, the trial. They listen, eyes wide, sometimes skeptical, sometimes reverent. A woman with a crossbow smiles. Your sword sings. She says softly, But do you listen? You pause. The sword at your side hums faintly. As if answering, the night deepens. Stories become song. Laughter softens into whispers. And the weapons around you gleam with a light not of this world. Here, in the circle of broken warriors and worn weapons. You understand? Every sword, every spear, every musket holds a story, a breath of the past, a hope for the future. And sometimes, just sometimes, a chance for peace. You close your eyes. Let the hum of steel and spirit lull you. And for once, you don't reach for your sword. You just listen. Morning breaks, soft and slow. Like a whispered secret, you awake beneath the ancient boughs of a willow tree. Leaves rustling a gentle lullaby above you. The sword lies beside you. Cold, but calm. Its hum, subdued, as if in respect for the dawn. You stand and stretch. Muscles stiff but steady. Ahead, the road forks one path, leads back toward the forest and the spearmen. The other winds toward a place you've heard. In whispers, the fortress of Belvin. Belvin! A name like a thunderclap wrapped in velvet. A place where legends say the line between sword and shadow blurs. Where warriors carry blades so sharp they cut through more than just flesh. And where the muskets sing songs of fire and fate. You choose the road to Belvin. The journey is long. Weaving through fields strewn with wildflowers and forgotten bones. Along the way, you pass ruins, walls covered in ancient script, broken statues that once stood proud, and crosses bent by time and weather. As you walk, you feel the sword's weight shift. Not heavier, not lighter, different, like a heartbeat out of sync, but never quite lost. You arrive at the gates as the sun dips low, casting long shadows that stretch like fingers across the stone. The fortress stands tall, imposing, its walls scarred from battles both seen and unseen. Guards watch silently, eyes sharp, but welcoming a rare kindness in a world sharpened by war. Inside, the air is thick with smoke and incense. The scent of iron and wood smoke mingles with whispered prayers. You are led to a great hall where warriors gather, their faces etched with stories, their weapons gleaming under flickering torchlight. Among them, a figure stands out, a warrior cloaked in midnight blue, eyes like burning embers, and a sword that seems to drink in the light. They approach you, nodding in recognition, without words. They hand you a scroll, ancient, fragile, yet powerful. It speaks of the seventh strike, a vow to wield sword and musket not as tools of destruction, but as guardians of balance. You feel the weight of that vow settle upon you, mingling with the hum of your sword and the echoes of gunfire. Outside, the fortress bells toll a reminder that in this world of blades and powder, peace is a fleeting breath between storms. You sheath your sword, feeling its pulse steady once more. And as night cloaks Belvin in shadow, you understand the journey of the warrior is not just about the weapon they carry, but the heart they bear. The fortress gates creak open, and you step into a world balanced precariously between old and new. The cobblestones beneath your boots are worn smooth by generations of soldiers, monks, and merchants, all carrying stories as heavy as the swords they bore. Inside the great hall, banners hang high, their colors faded, but their symbols unmistakable. A blend of crosses, lions, and the strange sigil of a musket crossed with a spear. This is a place where steel and powder coexist, where the clang of swords mingles with the sharp report of early firearms. You find yourself among the veterans, men and women who have seen the evolution of war firsthand. One grizzled soldier, his face a roadmap of scars, catches your eye. He holds a halberd in one hand, the other resting on the stock of a battered musket. He nods at you. A silent welcome. Stories unfold around the fire. Tales of battles where musketeers stood shoulder to shoulder with pikemen, where swordsmen charged beneath volleys of crossbow bolts, and where the line between honor and survival blurred. You listen as a young woman recounts how her father taught her to load a musket before she could tie her shoes, emphasizing patience over speed. Nearby, an old knight reminisces about the last duel fought with swords before gunpowder claimed its place on the battlefield. The sword at your side hums softly, resonating with the echoes of these tales. The musket slung across your back feels heavier, a reminder of the changing tides. You realize that here, in Belven, the future and past are not enemies but allies woven together by those who carry both blade and powder with equal respect. As the night deepens, you step outside to the battlements. The stars shimmer above, distant yet constant. You draw your sword, feeling its familiar weight, and watch as a musketeer beside you loads his firearm, the match cord glowing like a dying ember. Together, you face the dark horizon, ready for whatever dawn may bring. The night around Belven is thick with whispers and shadows. You walk the ramparts, the cool stone pressing beneath your boots, the sword humming softly at your side, its voice low and contemplative. The musket on your back is silent, but ever present, a reminder of the world's relentless march forward. Ahead, torches flicker, illuminating the figures of sentries, young recruits learning the art of vigilance. Their eyes flicker between sword hilts and gun stocks, unsure where to place their faith. You understand that uncertainty. You've lived it. In the courtyard below, a smith pounds steadily, shaping steel that will soon become blades, spearheads, or barrels. The rhythmic clang echoes like a heartbeat, steady and unyielding. You pose, watching the dance of creation, fire, and hammer. Sweat and song. It's the same ritual you witnessed long ago in that chapel forge. Yet now, it carries a new rhythm. A hybrid cadence born of tradition and innovation. A voice calls from behind, "It's the fortress commander." A woman with eyes sharp as obsidian and a presence that commands silence. She speaks of the coming days, of battles where muskets will thunder and spears will rise, where swords will sing and men will fall. "You carry more than weapons," she says, fixing her gaze on you. "You carry the weight of balance." You nod, understanding that the dance you've walked is far from over, that the sword and musket are not rivals, but partners in a story still unfolding. As the moon rises, casting silver light over the fortress, you find a quiet spot beneath the battlements. You draw your sword, feeling its familiar pulse. Then rest your hand on the musket's cool wood. 2 instruments, 1 purpose. You close your eyes, letting the night's cool embrace settle over you, and listen to the clang of the smith's hammer, to the distant roll of drums, and to the quiet hum of steel and powder intertwined. The future awaits, and you are ready. The dawn breaks pale over the fortress walls, casting long shadows that stretch like fingers over the stone. You awaken to the distant clang of armor and the muted thud of boots on wood. The day is beginning, not with fanfare, but with purpose. You step into the courtyard, where soldiers prepare for inspection. Some carry muskets polished to a dull gleam. Others grip spears sharpened anew. The air buzzes with anticipation and a quiet tension, the kind that precedes a storm. A captain approaches, his face weathered but eyes bright. He speaks of a coming battle, one that will test the union of steel and powder, tradition and innovation. He tells you stories of old sieges, where sword and spear could no longer hold the line, and how the musket promised a new dawn. You listen, your sword sheathed, but never far from reach. The musket slung at your side feels heavier today, as if sharing the weight of expectation. In a quiet corner, a group of soldiers practices volley fire, their coordinated volleys echoing through the morning mist. Nearby, a knight trains with his longsword, each strike precise and deliberate, a dance of grace and power. You feel the hum of your sword resonate with the rhythm of battle drums and the crack of gunfire. Historians still debate whether such battles were won by the sword or the musket. Some argue it was the courage of men. Others credit the evolution of weaponry. You know, the truth is more complicated. A tapestry woven from steel, powder, and human will. As the sun climbs higher, you prepare to join the fray. The swordsmen rally. The musketeers line up. And you stand between them, bearing both past and future. Your journey, carried in the weight of your weapons and the fire of your spirit, is about to reach its crescendo. And in that moment, the world will listen. The battlefield sprawls before you, like a living beast, breathing, waiting, hungry. Dust swirls in lazy spirals, mingling with the smoke of fires not yet fully ablaze. The air crackles with tension, the kind that grips at your chest and whispers promises of blood and glory. You stand at the edge of the formation, sword sheathed, musket ready, but not yet fired. Around you, warriors adjust their grips, steady their breathing, ready their hearts. The enemy approaches a tide of armor and intent, moving with the relentless rhythm of a storm. Spears glint like silver waves, crossbows cock with quiet menace, muskets glimmer ominously in the sun. The battle is a collision of ages. The long spear meets the musket's thunder. The crossbow's bite intertwines with the sword's song. You breathe in, steady your hands. Then the first volley roars. The earth shakes beneath your feet. Chauzerupchis. Amid the roar, you find your rhythm, a step, a parry, a shot. Your sword arcs in the sun, your musket cracks like thunder. The world narrows to the clash of steel and powder. In this moment, the past and future are one. Victory is not just in the weapon, but in the wielder. You fight. You endure. And as the sun sets behind a haze of smoke, you stand victorious, not just over enemies, but over the doubts that once weighed you down. Your sword hums with pride. Your musket rests easy. Together, they tell the story of a warrior who carried both blade and fire. And in their song, the world remembers. The battle has ended. but the echoes linger. Smoke drifts over the fields like forgotten prayers. Mingling with the scent of trampled grass and spilled blood, the sun dips low, casting a golden haze over the wounded and the weary. You stand amid the quiet aftermath, sword sheathed, musket slung low, heart pounding with the residue of combat. Around you, survivors tend to the fallen, patch wounds, and whisper thanks to the fading light. The swords and muskets, once instruments of war, now rest heavy in their hands, symbols of sacrifice and survival. You walk slowly toward a shattered chapel, its walls scorched and crumbling. Inside, a single altar remains, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. You kneel, placing your sword upon it. The blades hum, soft and steady, a lullaby for the restless. Beside it, you lay the musket, its cold metal catching the last rays of the sun. Two weapons, two eras, united in purpose. You close your eyes, breathing in the quiet. Historians still debate the turning point, the moment when swords yielded to gunpowder. When honor met pragmatism, when the past gave way to the future. But you know the truth lies not in dates or doctrines, but in moments like this, where a warrior carries both legacy and change, where every strike and shot tells a story. The sword hums its final note, fading into silence. The musket's shadow stretches long, and you rise. The journey is over, but the story that lives on. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Sweet dreams.